When people talk about Major League Baseball's shortest-lived stadium, the answer needs a small qualification. Baseball's earliest decades included temporary grounds, relocated clubs and ballparks used only briefly under circumstances that do not compare neatly with the modern game. But in the expansion era, when looking at a regular home stadium used by a major league team, one case stands above the rest. Sick's Stadium in Seattle, home of the Seattle Pilots for exactly one season in 1969. It was a ballpark that gave Seattle its first taste of Major League Baseball, then watched that opportunity disappear almost immediately. The Pilots played their first home game there on April 11, 1969. Their final home game came on October 2nd of the same year. By the time the 1970 season began, the franchise had been sold, moved to Milwaukee, and renamed the Brewers. 1 year, one team, one stadium renovation that seemed to go wrong almost from the moment the work began. And the strange part is that Sick's Stadium itself was not new. It had been part of Seattle baseball for decades before the Pilots arrived. The stadium opened in 1938 in Seattle's Rainier Valley, near the intersection of Rainier Avenue South and South McClellan Street. It was built for the Seattle Rainiers of the Pacific Coast League and named for Emil Sick, the owner of the Rainiers and the Rainier Brewing Company. For minor league baseball, the park had been a respected local venue. The Rainiers played there for years, Seattle fans knew the place well, and the building became tied closely to the city's baseball identity. The stadium also hosted a few events that gave it a life beyond baseball. Elvis Presley performed there in 1957. Jimi Hendrix later played at the stadium in 1970. But none of that prepared the building for what happened when the American League decided Seattle was ready for the majors. By the mid-1960s, Seattle wanted a Major League Baseball team. The city was growing, the Pacific Northwest represented an untapped market, and the American League was trying to strengthen its presence in the western United States. Seattle appeared to make sense. The stadium situation, however, was already raising warning signs. When the Cleveland Indians explored a possible move to Seattle earlier in the decade, their representatives examined Sick's Stadium and were unimpressed. A few years later, Kansas City Athletics owner Charlie Finley considered Seattle before ultimately moving his club to Oakland. Finley's opinion of Sick's Stadium was famously direct. He reportedly called it a pigsty. That should probably have been considered a red flag. Instead, in 1967, the American League awarded an expansion franchise to a Seattle ownership group led by brothers Dewey and Max Soriano, with former Cleveland Indians owner William Daley later becoming the largest investor. The league's plan was straightforward on paper. The Pilots would temporarily play at Sick's Stadium while Seattle developed a new domed venue. The temporary home still needed major work. Sick's had been built for the Pacific Coast League, and estimates of its existing capacity vary by source, generally ranging between roughly 11,000 and 15,000 seats before the Major League expansion. Either way, it was nowhere close to what an MLB club needed. The American League wanted the building brought up to Major League standards, while a new dome was pursued. A stadium bond measure eventually passed as part of Seattle's Forward Thrust program, helping pave the way for what would eventually become the King Dome. But that future building was years away. For the Pilots, the immediate problem was getting Sick's Stadium ready for opening day. And this is where the entire situation began to unravel. The Pilots had originally been expected to begin playing in 1971. That timeline changed after the Kansas City Athletics moved to Oakland following the 1967 season. Missouri political pressure pushed Major League Baseball to restore a team to Kansas City quickly, leading to the creation of the Kansas City Royals for 1969. Seattle's franchise was moved forward as well, giving the American League an even number of teams. Suddenly, Seattle was preparing for Major League Baseball 2 years earlier than planned, in a stadium that already needed substantial renovation. The city eventually committed approximately $1.5 million toward improvements at Sick's Stadium. There were plans to add thousands of seats, improve clubhouses, expand restroom facilities, and upgrade the rest of the venue. But negotiations dragged on, budgets shifted, and construction did not begin seriously until early 1969, only months before the season. Then, the winter weather arrived. Heavy snow slowed the project badly. By opening day, April 11, 1969, the stadium remained unfinished. The planned expanded capacity had not been achieved. HistoryLink places the opening day capacity at roughly 17,000, while the official attendance for the game was 15,014. Those 15,014 fans did get to see a historic moment. the Pilots defeated the Chicago White Sox 7-0, with pitcher Gary Bell throwing a complete game shutout. Seattle had finally arrived in Major League Baseball. Some fans, however, had to wait while their seating was still being installed. Carpenters were working on bleachers as the game was being played. In some areas, spectators did not reach their seats until the third inning. The right field bleachers were nowhere near completed. Restroom facilities were unfinished. Some spectators watched through gaps in a temporary fence. Opening day usually comes with a ceremonial first pitch, fresh paint, and a sense that everything is ready. At Sick's Stadium, the fresh paint became part of the problem. During the early season, some new sections had paint that reportedly was not completely dry, leaving fans with cleaning bills after sitting down. That may be the most 1969 Seattle Pilots detail imaginable. Buy a ticket to see Major League Baseball, leave with paint on your clothes, and hope the plumbing makes it through the seventh inning. The plumbing was a serious issue. When the stadium filled beyond a certain level, water pressure dropped sharply. Visiting players sometimes returned to their hotels to shower because the clubhouse facilities were inadequate. According to HistoryLink, when crowds exceeded around 10,000, toilets could stop flushing properly. This was a major league stadium where a strong attendance night could create a bathroom crisis. The seating expansion continued during the season, and Six eventually grew to around 25,000 seats. Yet, increased capacity did little to solve the broader problems. Some new seats had obstructed views. Facilities remained poor. The stadium had been patched together for a level of baseball it had never been designed to handle. Even Commissioner Bowie Kuhn was blunt about the building. After attending the home opener, he later described Sick's Stadium as anything but major league. On the field, the Pilots at least had moments that Seattle fans could enjoy. Tommy Harper became one of the club's standout players and led the major leagues with 73 stolen bases. The team had a distinctive identity, from its naval-inspired name and uniforms to the scrambled eggs decoration on the caps. Years later, the Pilots would become famous through pitcher Jim Bouton's book, Ball 4, which documented his 1969 season and gave the club an enduring place in baseball culture. But during the actual season, the club struggled. Seattle finished 64-98, last in the newly formed American League West. Poor results did not help ticket sales, though blaming the fans alone would be far too easy. The organization had financial problems before the first pitch had even been thrown. The stadium had made attending games less appealing. Ticket and concession prices frustrated fans. The promises of a modern future were attached to a present-day building that seemed to be failing in public. The Pilots had hoped to attract 1 million fans and believed they needed approximately 850,000 to break even. Their final attendance for 1969 was 677,944. That placed them near the bottom of Major League Baseball attendance that season, and the club's financial losses became impossible to ignore. By June, only a few months into the first season, internal projections already showed serious trouble. According to research published by the Society for American Baseball Research, the Pilots were facing a projected shortfall of approximately $2.2 million. By the end of the season, their actual loss was estimated at around $800,000. The stadium was a major issue, but it was not the only one. The ownership group was underfunded, the business community had not been properly brought into the project, and the American League had approved a franchise without ensuring that the club had the resources or venue needed to survive. Seattle had received Major League Baseball quickly. Too quickly. By late 1969, rumors began circulating that the Pilots could move. William Daley publicly stated that Seattle had one more year to prove itself, a comment that went over about as well as telling disappointed fans that the stadium's washrooms would work eventually. Local efforts were made to keep the club in Seattle. Prospective ownership groups attempted to assemble financing. Political leaders became involved. The team's financial position, however, continued to deteriorate. Meanwhile, Milwaukee businessman Bud Selig had been pursuing a major league team for his city after the Braves moved to Atlanta following the 1965 season. The Pilots became his opportunity. In March 1970, the Pilots ownership group filed for bankruptcy. On March 31st, bankruptcy referee Sidney Volan approved the sale of the franchise to Selig's Milwaukee group for $10.8 million. The decision came only days before the start of the 1970 season. The Seattle Pilots became the Milwaukee Brewers. There was barely enough time to change the uniforms. The club had gone through spring training as the Pilots, then opened the season as the Brewers. Seattle's major league team had vanished so quickly that the move felt less like a relocation and more like somebody changing the destination board while the train was already moving. For Six Stadium, that meant its major league history had ended after one season. The building that Seattle had hurriedly renovated for the Pilots never hosted another MLB game. Its final major league night came on October 2, 1969. Only 5,473 fans attended as the Pilots lost 3-1 to the Oakland Athletics in rainy conditions. At the time, those fans did not officially know they were watching Seattle's first major league franchise play its final home game. Months later, the meaning of that evening changed completely. The stadium remained in use after the Pilots left. A new Seattle Rainiers team played there in the Class A Northwest League from 1972 through 1976. The University of Washington baseball team also used the venue for the 1973 season while work was underway at its campus facility. But the building was no longer being prepared for a bright major league future. It had become a reminder of the one that had fallen apart. Seattle did not simply accept the loss of the Pilots. The city, King County, and the state of Washington sued the American League after the franchise departed. That legal fight continued for years. Eventually, with the dispute still hanging over baseball, the American League awarded Seattle another expansion franchise. In 1977, the Seattle Mariners began play at the Kingdome. By then, Six Stadium had outlived its purpose. It was demolished in 1979. Today, the location is occupied by a Lowe's home improvement store. Markers at the site remember the old ballpark, including the former location of home plate and other references to the Rainiers and Pilots. There is something fittingly strange about that ending. The most famous one-season Major League stadium of the modern era is now remembered inside and around a hardware store. Given how much construction was still happening during the Pilots' first home game, perhaps the location never fully escaped its original calling. Still, the story of Six Stadium deserves more than jokes about unfinished bleachers and failing plumbing. The stadium represented Seattle's first attempt to enter Major League Baseball. It also exposed how badly a franchise launch can go when league ambition moves faster than planning, money, and construction. The Pilots did not fail because Seattle could never support baseball. The Mariners later established that Seattle could become a lasting Major League city. The Pilots failed because their franchise was rushed into existence, their ownership group lacked sufficient financial strength, and their temporary stadium was never properly equipped for the assignment it had been given. Six Stadium lasted for decades as a Seattle ballpark, but as a Major League home, it received only a single season. From April to October 1969, fans entered through its gates to watch the Seattle Pilots. By the following spring, the team belonged to Milwaukee, the name had changed, and Seattle was left with an empty stadium and a lawsuit. That is how a long-serving local ballpark became the shortest-lived regular Major League home of the modern expansion era. One unfinished opening day, one difficult season, and one franchise that sailed out of Seattle almost as quickly as it had arrived.
And that's our video today on the shortest-lived MLB stadium. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down below. Maybe we missed something, maybe we added something you didn't know before. But anyways, my name's Justin. I'll see you next time on TFC Stadiums. Ciao.